Stand! Stand! Stand!
If you want to dance, ask me nicely. Let's talk. Better listen very carefully.
No problem. You having fun?
No!
Thanks.
Hello, and welcome to Jean-Claude Van Damme, episode 19. This is the podcast where we talk about Van Damme movies because Rudy can't fail. I'm your host, Marcus Jones, and joining me today is a three-peat. I have my friend Zach Clopton on for the third appearance. How are you doing, Zach?
I am doing fine, good sir. Thank you for having me back.
Absolutely. Of course, Zach Clopton, who, if you've listened to this podcast, you know he's been on 2 episodes so far of Zach's Film Thoughts and the Bangers and Mash show. Just recently, still working on his second JCVD-a-thon.
Yeah, that's actually why I'm here. I'm here to promote my... Last year, around, I think it was May, I did the JCVD-a-thon, the first one, for my blog. Mm-hmm. And this year I'm doing a sequel, and I figured I would come on your show to help promote the little marathon I'm doing.
Absolutely, and again, your marathon was one of the inspirations for the show starting, so it's only relevant.
Yeah, and you know, the purpose of the second JCVD-a-thon was really to kind of explore the direct-to-video years, which are pretty overlooked. I mean, I think only diehard fans really explore these films. And, you know, I've found a lot of interesting films. Like, I almost did this episode on Inferno, which is a really fun, goofy kind of, almost a parody of, like, Western Akira Kurosawa Yojimbo type things.
I literally cannot not call that Desert Heat. I'm just always going to call that Desert Heat because of that poster that I know, the video
Yeah,
box.
I mean, it goes back and forth. I think it's equally known by both titles. But
well, even on IMDb, it's known as Inferno, but I just know that poster of him on the motorcycle with Desert Heat above him.
Yeah, I mean, I was under the impression that it was just released in Europe as Desert Heat, but that seems to be the title most people call it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the VHS box I remember seeing in video stores.
Well, whatever. I almost picked that one because I really like that movie a lot. And there's a lot of other really interesting stuff from those years. Like, a lot of those films are kind of made almost to subvert sort of your typical expectations for Van Damme. Like, Legionnaire is a pretty serious war drama. In Hell is a very grim prison movie, and there's very little karate in both of these films. And then
that was actually the last episode I did. I just recorded
Right.
the other night with Pete Moran, and we did In Hell.
Yeah, and then there's a film like Until Death, which is sort of half a typical Van Damme shoot-'em-up movie, and then half a domestic drama about
a bad lieutenant.
Yeah, it's like half a police drama and half of a movie about a man trying to put his life together, and has very little like typical, you know, kickboxing and jump kicks and splits and such. And all these would have been good choices for an episode, and I'm sure these are all films that you will get to down the line. But the one I picked today is The Order from 2001, and really there's one scene in this, you know, overall this film, it's not bad, it's kind of forgettable, it's not great. Yeah, it's kind of a middling effort, but there is one scene in this film that is fantastic and takes this movie from a film I probably would not recommend to a film I absolutely have to tell people to see.
More like you gotta see to believe.
Yeah, which is the sequence where Van Damme is being chased through Jerusalem, and he is in disguise as a Hasidic Jew. He has the black hat on, the beard, the peyot curls on the side of his head, and he's doing the action. He does this amazing mid-air split kick during this chase scene, and it is absolutely the highlight of the film, and perhaps the primary reason to see it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's kind of amazing because it's this weird, almost like Benny Hill-esque kind of slapsticky chase for the most part.
Yeah, it is.
Which is odd.
Yeah, well, and this movie has kind of a weird tonal back and forth where there are scenes that are very comedic and very goofy, and then moments that come off as more serious, perhaps overly serious.
Oh yeah, and of course that's one of the things I was excited to explore with this podcast was the direct-to-video years. Of course, everyone immediately took the hits in the Hollywood movies first, but now I'm to the point where like, haha, anyone that wants to be on my show kind of has to pick a direct-to-video movie. So I'm excited about that, and especially ones like this, which The Order I had never seen before. So I got to see this for the first time, which is another reason I've done this podcast is to finally pick off the few that I haven't seen.
Oh, wow, that really surprises me. I figured... I mean, I guess I just assume you've seen all of Van Damme's movies.
No, you would think that, but there have been several that I hadn't seen. Like, even some of the not-so-direct-to-video ones, like, I did an episode on Nowhere to Run, and I had not seen that movie before. That's just one I had skipped over for one reason or another.
Yeah, Nowhere to Run was one I hadn't seen until my recent marathon, and I gotta say, I didn't really like that one that much. I think your podcast episode was a little more positive on it, but I found that film to be a bit of a snore.
Yeah, speaking of your recent JCVD-a-thon, you finally watched Derailed. I just read your piece on that earlier.
Yeah, that was yesterday's review, and, I gotta tell you, that movie was actually... Well, first off, I mentioned your show in my review.
Yeah, I saw that.
And secondly, it was actually worse than you said it was. That film is a catastrophe. And that's something else I want to talk about with this movie, is this is the first film Jean-Claude would do with New Image / Millennium Films. Now, are you familiar with the New Image / Millennium oeuvre?
I'm not, actually. I was interested when I saw you writing about that in your piece, because I wasn't really familiar with their work, like what they've produced.
Yeah, well, New Image is this company that I
know Millennium, but not New Image.
Well, they're the same company. I mean, New Image, I think, is the production house, and Millennium is the distribution house. Mm-hmm. And most of their movies I've seen are not nearly terrible, not really bad, but like honestly terrible. And yet, for some reason, I'm kind of fascinated with them because they started in the early '90s. They're a low budget production house. Most of their films are shot in South Africa or Bulgaria. And they started out doing low-budget action films, like, basically rip-offs. Things like Cyborg Cop and Project Storm Chaser, the cinema of David Bradley and Frank Zagarino, stars of that caliber. And then around the turn of the millennium, they started doing these really shitty monster movies. They did kind of a thematic trilogy of films, which includes Spiders, Octopus, and Tobe Hooper's Crocodile, which is Tobe Hooper's worst film, which is no small feat. And, Shark Attack, the Shark Attack trilogy is also from New Image, and I think most...
Oh, Shark Attack, that's from the director of Derailed.
Yes, and, The Order is the first film, I believe, first of 5 movies Van Damme would do for this company, and Derailed was one of them, as well as In Hell and Replicant, and then years later he would come back for The Expendables, because that's the interesting thing with New Image. For years they were associated just with bottom-of-the-barrel schlock, and then at some point they teamed up with Sylvester Stallone and became kind of a legitimate production company. I mean, legitimate insofar as films like The Expendables and the Olympus Has Fallen franchise. Those are their 2 big hits.
Oh, I was about to say, do you think they went legitimate, or do you think that's just where Sylvester Stallone could get The Expendables made?
Well, I think he first worked with the company with Rambo, the 4th Rambo movie. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I feel like that was kind of the level he was at the time, but a franchise like Rambo was still able to get in theaters because, that was after the 6th Rocky, which was successful. Mm-hmm. And now, like I said, they're not doing as much direct-to-video schlock. They're still kind of making the same sort of movies, but with bigger budgets that actually get released in theaters.
And actual stars that can carry movies like that. You got your Gerard Butlers. Yeah, you're going to get a movie in theaters.
Yeah, though I don't know why. Gerard Butler is one of those people who most people do not seem to like his movies. Most of his films don't seem to make that much money, and yet for some reason he has his own franchise.
I think it's all because of 300, that he just got a ticket for at least 15 years, I guess.
Well, I guess because it's getting to the point where 300, that was 7 or 8 years ago at this point,
Yeah, I guess, he can only cruise on it for so long, but it's worked for him so far.
But apparently those Olympus Has Fallen movies do make money. I saw the first one. I thought it was pretty dour, but I heard the second one was terrible. But they're making another one, so I guess they do make money. Anyway, so The Order. So, this is kind of where Van Damme's career was at in 2001. Him and New Image was sort of a perfect marriage. Unfortunately, that was kind of where his star had fallen at that point.
It's true, but that's one of the things about Van Damme's direct-to-video years is that unlike most of the other people in direct-to-video purgatory, all the other action stars from his time period, like, he used that time to do weird and different things and work with lesser-known filmmakers and stuff, and just, I don't know, he branched out more and became a better actor through it, as opposed to, you know, like your Steven Seagals or whatever that just kept making the same fucking movies over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's a lot of experimentation this time. I mean, I've already mentioned stuff like Legionnaire, which is a mediocre movie where he gives a great performance, and something like Replicant, which I've got to talk about. That'll be my next episode, because that movie is fucking nuts, and Ringo Lam is a genius.
I really enjoy Replicant. I've been excited. I've been, like, pushing Replicant on several people that have wanted to do the show or wanted to come back, being like, hey, we should do Replicant, but no one's wanted to do it so far, and I don't fucking understand why.
Well, it's probably just because they haven't seen it. I mean, it's pretty obscure. But I picked this one for this episode because it's a little more fresher in my brain. I'll have to rewatch Replicant before we do that. I think eventually as you go deeper and deeper into Van Damme's filmography, it's probably going to be me and Sean on most of the episodes.
I think that's probably going to be the case. Let's talk a bit about Sheldon Lettich. This is actually the third Sheldon Lettich written or directed film that's been on this podcast, and I'm pretty proud to say I'm probably the only podcast that has had 3 Sheldon Lettich movies on it.
Yeah, I don't think there are too many Sheldon Lettich fans out there these days, though I'm looking at his IMDb page right now, and apparently he had a movie recently. He did that movie Max about the PTSD dog. Oh yeah, he wrote that, and he's also writing the second one. There's a sequel coming out to that, I guess. Yeah, well, you know, it makes sense. He's done, I'm looking at, it looks like 5 movies with Van Damme, in addition to writing, doing some work on the Bloodsport screenplay. So, yeah, and it's interesting because I'm a big fan of his previous films that he drew. Well, I really like Double Impact. Lionheart, I know you're a huge fan of. I love Lionheart. Also, have you seen Only the Strong, the one they did with Mark Dacascos? No, I haven't seen that. That's a really entertaining movie. Well, you know, maybe Mark Dacascos will be my next action star marathon. Well, it's weird because even that movie, I mean, it's not quite a Van Damme film, and I could see why he wouldn't want to do it, but it's, especially the time period it's very surprising that wasn't a movie that he did with Van Damme. But Mark Dacascos is kind of everyone's, like, third choice for things. That's why he's in the 5th Kickboxer movie, after Sasha Mitchell said no more. Yeah, wow, that must be a blow to your self-esteem. You're the replacement for Sasha Mitchell. Well, I'm just saying, that's probably why they never made a Class of 1999-3. They couldn't find anyone. Yeah, so it is interesting to compare this movie to Double Impact and Lionheart. And the order's direction is interesting to me because the fight scenes overall are very strongly directed. Like, the action choreography is very good. Oh, the action is great in this movie. But there are some other scenes where the direction and the editing seem pretty shoddy to me. I'm thinking of, there are 2 big car chases in this movie from what I recall, and the first of which ends with Van Damme and Charlton Heston going through a wall of bottled water, like that water reaction shot. Oh my god. That reaction shot of Charlton Heston that looks like he is having a stroke or something. He might have been. That's true. Well, which also, it is an Charlton Heston credit, and he has maybe 5 minutes of screen time. Yeah, it's sort of weird. Like, what the fuck was Charlton Heston doing in a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie in 2001? Like, of all the things. I think he maybe just wanted a free trip to Jerusalem. He just wanted a vacation. Because it's a beautiful city, and I will say that, because this is, not a super low-budget movie. It was like $12 million. But shooting in Jerusalem gave it immediate, like, production value. Like, it's a beautiful city. The film looks wonderful because of the locations that it's filmed in. Yeah, that's a good point, and though I do think that probably only that big chase scene was actually shot in Jerusalem. I imagine, like, the last act where they're in the temple was on some soundstage, probably in Bulgaria, since that's where most of the company shots their movies. But what I was saying is, like, there's a second chase scene on a airport, and those car chases are kind of, the editing strikes me as a little jarring. And I wonder, I don't know if that's Sheldon Lettich's fault. I don't know if that's the editor's fault. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking it's probably the fault of the production company since they make movies very quickly and very cheaply. But I'll just say that you look at the direction in Double Impact, which I think is a beautifully directed movie. There's that wonderful fight scene that's in blue and purple neon light, and I just love the visual palette of that film. And you compare it to a film like this, and it doesn't quite stand up to that level.
It's much more bland than something like a Double Impact. But no, there's actually 3 chases, because you forgot there's a second car chase where Van Damme is on a motorcycle, which, by the way, after watching several movies recently, I kind of think that I need to make Van Damme on a motorcycle one of the tropes of his films.
Yeah, because there's a motorcycle chase in Nowhere to Run. There's that weird kind of 3-wheeled moped chase thing in Maximum Risk.
Derailed, of course. There's a big motorcycle scene in that.
The motorcycle scene in Derailed makes no fucking sense, but that's a different podcast.
Desert Heat / Inferno, he's on a motorcycle on the fucking poster.
Of course. So, yeah, I guess you're right. There was a lot of motorcycle stuff. Does he do... I know a lot of celebrities like collect cars and motorcycles in real life. Does he do that?
I want to say yes, because I remember there was a video online, and it was Van Damme kind of being kooky and running around his house the day that he was signing his contract for the Kickboxer sequel. And yeah, there was like a very fancy like motorcycle in his house that he showed off for a moment.
Okay.
So I think that might just be one of his things.
Well, it's always, even at this point in his career, I think Van Damme had a certain sway over like the scripts and the stories, especially when he was working with a director like Sheldon Letters that he'd done several films with. And
he co-wrote this movie as well.
Oh, of course, yeah. And this film, you can really kind of see a lot of the Van Damme trademarks. I mean, within like the first 5 minutes, he's doing jump kicks and roundhouse kicks, and he's even dancing a little. So.
Oh yeah, well yeah, because it does hit, I think, all of the tropes in this movie. But no, I think it is the fact that, Van Damme kind of came up writing a lot of his own stories, having a lot of input in his movies as he became a bigger star. Then he kind of got to like the big Hollywood aspect where he burned bright and then kind of faded out. So I think he kind of wanted to have more control as he got into direct-to-video. So doing a movie like this, in between, doing stuff like Derailed or even Legionnaire and stuff, which is much more of his kind of movie, I think he wanted like, I have to write my own movie to show people why they liked me again.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element to this. And this movie was sort of meant to be kind of a low-budget Indiana Jones.
Which it does have aspects of that, especially... I know the tone does change a lot in the third act and it does get much more serious and stuff, but that's when it becomes most like Indiana Jones, like more so, much more Last Crusade than like Raiders or anything. But even like one of the opening shots when he's stealing the Fabergé egg from a museum or wherever it is at, he has like a Raiders moment where he's like kind of taking the idol a little bit, and I kind of wish that he had put something in place of it to try to like to even the weight or something.
Yeah, I definitely think that last act where they're in the temple and they're avoiding booby traps was absolutely inspired by Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Though it's not as impressive as that. I mean, there's no...
Well, booby trap.
Yeah,
his father's like, this is where the traps start, and like, no, one trap.
Yeah, there's this hole that opens up in the ground, and I kind of wonder, maybe they had maybe the script had more stuff like that in it, but they had to cut it for budgetary reasons.
Yeah, or they even filmed it and cut it, because this is an 89-minute long movie. Like, I feel like this could have easily been closer to 100 minutes, and they might have cut some stuff out.
That's true, but I gotta say, the concise runtime is one of the things I like about this film, because I'm generally of the opinion that comedies and action movies should not run more than 90 minutes.
Well, I agree with you, and I do feel like by the time it gets to the third act and it does start to drag and get a little boring, it's like, but there's only 15 minutes left, so it's okay. Yeah,
well, it's sort of that weird transitional period, kind of the end of the second act, where there's a scene where he like goes undercover with the Order, and he's hanging out with this woman that's kind of his quasi-love interest in this film.
/ sidekick, yeah.
Yeah, that stuff feels more draggy to me. Once we get to the final act, it's a bit more serious, but at least you have him doing stuff like... getting in these fight scenes and sword fighting Brian Thompson. And
I was about to say, it's a bit more serious, but there is a sword fight scene, which has to be a first, as far as I know, in a Van Damme movie, is a Van Damme sword fight. But and the actual finale when he's trying to there's a bomb that they're gonna blow up and try to start a religious war. So
we should probably talk about the actual plot of this film
I guess
point.
we should, but yeah, no, just the fact that they randomly, like with 5 minutes left in the movie, just have his shirt ripped off in a final like bad guy showdown for no reason is amazing.
Yeah, no, I actually really, really love that they managed to get that in there. And I think in my review I say that he just randomly loses his shirt in the last act, which is the way it's supposed to be in a Van Damme movie. There should be no reason for him to take his shirt off other than that he has to.
But it's like him hanging off these beams, like trying not to fall in this big hole where the bomb is, and then the bad guy is hanging onto his shirt, and his shirt rips off so the bad guy can fall.
Which is how we get, him running from the shitty CGI explosion, bare-chested and glistening. Talking about crappy CGI, that's really a trademark of new films, or new Image millennial films, though the bad CGI in this movie is nothing compared to what was in Derailed.
Oh, yeah, well, because that was a combination of terrible CGI and then terrible model train sets.
Yeah, like some of the CGI gags in that make zero sense. In this one, you just have a kind of choppy-looking explosion at the end, and then that scene where he jump kicks a guy into a winch, and the bad guy gets impaled, and the CGI there is not too hot.
Oh yeah, it kind of reminds me of like the demon horns from like Dogma, like that kind of shitty CGI with like things poking out of skin that just look like they're obviously not there.
Yeah, I mean, this was 2001, so CGI was still kind of a new toy for filmmakers.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the CGI fire explosion is definitely bad, but at the very end of it, it cuts to like, I don't know if it's a model or something that actually exploded. It's probably a model, but it actually has like a real explosion come out of like when, the fire hits the outside world. And it's actually decent. And then they do like a big, outside crane shot, or outside kind of hovering shot where it's CGI. But there is like one actual practical explosion within all of that madness.
Yeah, and overall, this movie, there are times when it feels a bit cheap, but it's not really egregiously bad. Like, some of the stuff from this era in Van Damme, you really feel the lack of money. But this one looks okay. This, like you said, this is a $12 million movie. It looks about that level.
Yeah, exactly. They could afford 5 minutes of Charlton Heston, and they could do some good action scenes.
And it does have, well, I don't know how much of a name Brian Thompson is, but you and I know who he is because of, stuff like Cobra. And I guess he did a lot of, Cobra is what I think of him, and I think of his voice, which is just bizarrely deep. Like, it feels deeper than it should be.
Oh, no, it's great, because he's basically, like, Brian Jesus Thompson in this movie. Like, his look, his long hair and his beard, he just has like a Jesus thing going on. But this is also kind of a mini Lionheart reunion, because not only does it have Shelton Lettich writing and directing with Van Damme co-writing, but Brian Thompson was in Lionheart as well. He was the right-hand man to Cynthia, the bad lady, and that set him up with the fights.
The bad lady, yes.
The bad lady.
That's correct,
but also it has Abdel Kassi, Michael Kassi's brother, who played Attila in Lionheart. He's the big dude that he gets into a fight with, like, during that whole Hasidic Jew chase scene.
And Peter Molada has a bit part in this film, and he has been in a number of Van Damme movies, and actually directed his most recent film, Kill 'Em All. So
I still haven't seen that, but I heard it is not good.
Well, I'm going to conclude this most recent JCVD with that, and I'll just say, yeah, it's not super great.
I have to admit, like, his projects come up, I am excited for the Kickboxer sequel, and I'm really excited to see Blackwater, just see him and Dolph in a non-Universal Soldier movie.
Yeah, well, I am excited for that, but I'm gonna, when it comes to low-budget action films, I've learned to keep my expectations measured.
Yeah, that's probably, they can't all be Universal Soldier sequels.
Yeah. So anyway, we should, like I said, we've been recording for probably about 15 minutes to half an hour, and we haven't actually mentioned what this movie's about, so...
Well, go for it. I will say I was super surprised that this movie, it did open with like a kind of lovely helicopter shots, and I forgot to look up the guy that did the music for this, Pino Donaggio. I love the score in this movie.
Well, Pino Donaggio has done a lot of Brian De Palma films. Mm-hmm. He, he's actually kind of a bigger name as far as film composers go, so I was sort of surprised to see his name in the credits.
But yeah, wonderful score. That's one of the things I immediately noticed. I was like, I'm digging this like kind of action-adventure movie score that we have going on.
Yeah, Donaggio's great. I mean, he did the music for Dressed to Kill and the original Piranha, both of which are really fantastic scores.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, the first thing we see is Van Damme as a knight during the Crusades, which is kind of weird that he plays that because it doesn't have a thing later to where like he's related, like he's part of the bloodline or anything.
well, you kind of assume that this character is his ancestor because they mention that this knight, I'm going to fuck up this pronunciation, Charles Le Valiant, is Flemish, and I looked it up before recording, and Flemish can refer to anything in the Dutch or Belgian region of Europe.
But, again, that's never actually connected within the movie, and you have Belgian Van Damme, and his father is just, like, British. He's a crusty British white guy.
Well, you know, I mean, I know one of the troops you discuss on every episode is the accent and the ancestry. Yeah, so I think that was kind of their attempt to justify Van Damme being in this movie.
I guess they just wanted to dress him up like a knight for a hot second, but yeah, like, I guess, because it seems like, yeah, he's the, the descendant of him, but again, there's nothing about that or being like, there's a prophecy that, like, someone could stop us or, there's a descendant that can save the day or anything, so it's more just kind of weird.
So anyway, the plot of the film, yes, it begins in 1099, during the First Crusades, and it follows Charles Le Valiant, who is this Christian knight who becomes demoralized by the horrors of war and decides to create a new religious order. And,
and it's a mix of the three main religions, so it's a mix of Christianity and, Muslim and Jewish faith and stuff like that.
Yeah, they make a point of mentioning that, which I think is another reason why I don't know if they set the movie in Jerusalem and then wrote that, or wrote that line and then decided, oh, well, Jerusalem would make sense for that, since that's a hub for all three of those religions. So anyway, this knight becomes the leader of this religious order, and he writes the sacred text, which is then lost after the order is killed.
Wasn't it just the final chapter was lost, correct?
Right, yeah. So
I guess like his thesis statement was lost.
Yeah. But what's sort of weird about that is we later find out that the order has survived into the modern day. So I really kind of wonder how much of, how important that missing text must have been if this cult could continue hundreds of years later.
Well, and that's the thing too, because they set it up in the beginning like, okay, he had this small group of followers and they branched off, but then like they got attacked and killed at some point in time. But then, okay, maybe, some of the followers escaped and they continued. But for being a super small and secret sect that no one's really supposed to know about, fucking everybody is in on this thing. Like, they have a ton of members. The police are in on it. Like, even his cop lady romantic interest sidekick is like, oh yeah, I used to be in the order as a kid, but I left it. Like, what the fuck? Isn't this supposed to be like a super secret sect thing? And they're like being interviewed on the news and stuff.
Right.
And they even said like, oh, they don't want any press. They don't want anyone to know about them, but then the guy just does an interview on TV after the other guy dies.
Yeah, there might be some leaps in logic there. And speaking of leaps, the movie then leaps ahead to the modern day, 2001, and we meet our modern day Van Damme, who is Ruby. How the hell do you say his last name? Kaufmeyer?
Yeah, Rudy like Kaufmeyer or something like that.
Yeah, Rudy Kaufmeyer, and he is a smuggler and a thief of historical artifacts. He steals them for his father, who is, I believe he is stealing them for his father, who is an archaeologist and museum creator.
His father is against it. His father taught him about archaeology and stuff, but he just uses it for profit, while his father believes it should be in a museum. But no, like, he's like a shitty asshole Indiana Jones, pretty much.
Yeah, he's sort of the opposite of Indiana Jones. He's stealing things from museums instead of saying they belong in them.
Yeah, exactly. But I love, because, I mean, obviously Van Damme has to become the hero by the second and third act and stuff, but just his smarmy kind of sleazy charm asshole character that he's playing in the beginning is kind of wonderful, and that's what I loved about this movie, and that's what I think Van Damme knew to play into his strengths for his charisma and stuff, and then become like the selfless hero at the end of it. Like, it's pretty good story structure wise of what Van Damme knows he's good at.
Yeah, he's got a solid character arc in this, and I really do enjoy those opening scenes, which are very lighthearted and goofy, and he's having a good time. And, you know, when I have my checklist for my marathons, and dancing is one of them, and sometimes I have to cheat. He'll do, like, a move in the heat of battle that kind of looks like breakdancing, and I say, oh, that counts. But in this movie...
Well, he wasn't
actually,
breaking, so it
well,
works.
it's true. And in this movie, he actually dances. There's a scene where he meets some people in a strip club, and he does, like, a little jig.
Oh, he does, because Van Damme's not going to walk into a strip club and not dance at the ladies. That's just kind of what he does in life. But also, yeah, that whole scene in that club is kind of awesome because he's trying to sell this this artifact, this Fabergé thing that he stole in the opening scene, and the people he's trying to sell it to try to steal it from him, and there's a big fight and stuff like that. But he fights on a stripper pole. He uses a stripper pole to fling himself around and kick people, and it's kind of wonderful.
Yeah, that's a great moment. And I love, after that, he, like, leaps out a window and slides down a hillside, which is another really cool stunt.
Oh, yeah, definitely. No, there are a lot of really good stunts in this, but I just want to go ahead and bring this up now. How fucking weird is that after freeze frame, like, kind of, sort of, outtakes section before the credits start?
Well, you know, that was just kind of a thing in the early 2000s, and I think it's because... I'm sure it predates this, but I know the Rush Hour movies always did that. They always had a blooper reels during or before the credits.
No, I'm okay with that. The only thing is, it's not really completely that. Like, because the way it starts, like, there's a couple of outtakes in it, but the rest of it is literally just replaying fight scenes from the movie. It's not even showing him messing up, it's replaying fight scenes. So at first, I thought, like, it was gonna, like, show him doing stuff and then be, like, Jean-Claude Van Damme title card. Like, and they were gonna go through the people. That's what I thought it was gonna be. And then I saw, like, an outtake or two, and I was like, oh, no, this is different. But it's a weird mishmash of those.
Well, they probably just did it to pad the movie out. That was probably the real reason.
They had to hit that 89 minutes with credits.
Yeah. And during they show, like, they replay clips from the rabbi disguise scene, and they're playing, like, Kelpsmer music over it, which just makes that scene even more amazing. And, you know, and I gotta wonder, like, one thing Van Damme and I have in common, probably the only thing Van Damme and I have in common, is that we're both a quarter Jewish. And, yeah, okay, so I kind of feel like maybe he was trying to get in touch with his heritage or something during that whole sequence.
Yeah, is that the best way to go about it?
Well, I don't know, but it's delightful, and you need to make that the image for this episode, the shot of him in the hat with the curls.
Yeah, no, I absolutely will, but I will say that, like, if he's trying to do that, he's doing a terrible job, because he basically uses, like, Jewish stereotypes as one-liners throughout this movie. Yeah. Like, there's a scene where the lady cop like punches one of the Hasidic Jews in the face that's trying to, like, help him out during the chase scene, and he just, like, stands up and, like, cracks his jaw and is like, oy vey.
Yes.
And even the last scene where he gets his shirt ripped off when the bad cop guy, like, falls down the hole, he's like, time to say bon voyage, and Van Damme goes, shalom.
Yes. Oh my god, that was amazing.
It's like it's a McBain movie or something. Like, it's ridiculous. But again, that's part of the charm. Like, it's kind of offensive and kind of just weird and off-putting, but I kind of like it because as cheesy as Van Damme can be in some of his movies, his one-liners never really get that cheesy. Because this is more like 80s action, like Schwarzenegger kind of one-liners.
Yeah, and I've always felt that he wasn't... I mean, it works in this movie, but you look at something like Time Cop, and the one-liners in that are a bit awkward, and I felt like he wasn't really comfortable with them at that point. Or like the one-liners in Universal Soldier, you know, discharge, Sarge, are terrible. But,
yeah. Well, that's because he didn't write them. He wrote them for this one, and he thinks he's hilarious, so he delivered these with moxie.
Yeah, maybe. So anyway, back to describing the plot. So this lost sacred text is found, and Rudy has to go into Jerusalem and retrieve it, and then he gets involved there with the modern-day version of the Order, which has been taken over by a fanatical division of the Order, which is led by this guy named Cyrus, and he intends to set off a bomb underneath Jerusalem and trigger Holy War. for reasons that I can't remember now. Probably because he's evil. And
Well, I think it's weird. It's very confusing. For one, also, we didn't mention that his father has been kidnapped by them, and that's why he comes to Jerusalem in the first place. And Charlton Heston plays his father's friend, who, again, dies in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But no, okay, so the way it was kind of explained is, yes, he does want to set off a bomb to start a religious war because they're this radical sect of this group, but seem to be the entire group that think like, no, that there has to be a singular event that causes like a religious war for us to take our proper place. But
the point is Brian Thompson is our bad guy, and he's trying to do some bad shit, and Van Damme's got to lay the smackdown on him to save the day. So
sorry, I did remember what I was trying to say. It's okay, so there was the lost chapter of text that his father found, and his father was writing a book about the history of the Order, and basically saying that, like, the Order has neglected or it was unaware of this final text that kind of gave this mission statement that said, like, it's not the singular event, we don't need war, like, everyone should live in peace, yada, yada, yada. But they actually apparently maybe know about that, but are trying to not let anyone else know about it, try to keep that hidden so that they can keep their radical message going, but that's not really explored either. That's why it's confusing as shit.
Yeah, it's not super well explained. You know, and I just want to mention something about Brian Thompson is we have one of my favorite action movie tropes, which is cool guys don't look at explosions, and we have that straight up without any subversions in this movie.
No, it is so super serious. Like he says something that pissed off his superior, like the first disciple, and he's the second disciple. So he says something that pissed him off. He's like, "I'm sorry, I'll repent for this later tonight." And the first disciple gets in his car, and then he walks away, and it just blows up behind him in slow motion as he kind of cracks a half smile as he walks away. It's amazing. Also, I just looked down at my notes and saw this. This is a really bad joke that's early on in the movie, but I think it's kind of important. During the first break-in scene where he's stealing the Fabergé egg and he's talking to his guy Yuri out in the van, shit goes down and the security guards come in, and Yuri goes, "Was that a gunshot?" And Van Damme goes, "No, I farted," and then begins to fight people.
Yes!
Not only is that a terrible joke, I believe that has to be the first and only time JCVD has ever mentioned his flatulence in a film, or like bodily functions in a way. Maybe other than like In Hell, he takes a shit in In Hell, kind of. But like,
isn't there a poop joke in Welcome to the Jungle?
Oh, well, that makes a little bit more sense. I mean, like Van Damme movies.
Okay, that's true.
That's him
that
playing
is a
with
comedy,
the yeah, that is a comedy. But like Van Damme movies, like no, he's like the sexy action star. He's not going to talk about how he like blows air in his pants and shit like that. Like he's not going to talk about his flatulence. So not only is it a terrible joke that he may have written and maybe thought was hilarious, but yeah, it has to be the first time he like maybe let his guard down to where like, oh, of course women see my movies because they like my body. I'm going to make a fart joke.
Well, who knows? But that first scene is he's wearing some sort of face paint, but it kind of makes him look like a weird mime sort of thing.
Well, it's like blue and black.
Yeah, which reminds me of The Quest, where he also dressed up as a mime. So, I don't know. Maybe Van Damme was trying to channel his inner Marcel there. I don't know.
Maybe. He does seem to have a thing with face paint. He tends to like it.
Yeah, and that opening fight scene where he's being chased through for that museum and he's flipping people off of balconies and dodging blows. That's actually a really solid fight.
Oh no, that is a solid action scene, definitely. And again, the one in the club as well is a really solid action scene. Also, one of your trips, he does kick a guy through a glass window during that scene. He sure does.
Yeah, and so, like I said, overall this movie is a bit mediocre, but the action, for the most part, is pretty solid. I enjoy most of the fighting. You can, you watch some of these direct-to-video things and the action is not always too hot. But here, I think it does deliver on that. But let's talk about Charlton Heston. This was his third to last credit, or on-screen credit. He did some voice work.
Yeah, and actually, I did like 2 different interviews dealing with this Genghis Khan movie he filmed scenes for back in 1992 that has still yet to be released, so will technically be his last performance whenever it does get released.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that this had never been released. I'm looking at the...
Oh yeah, it says 2010, but it has still not been released.
Oh, it stars Richard Tyson.
Yeah, I did an interview with him because he's actually from Mobile, my hometown. and we
Yeah.
talked about that. He said it was like his favorite movie that he ever did that never got released, never saw the light of day. And then the son of the original producer, it was like an Italian production company or Italian producer, and his son, who was still working to finish the film and get it out, Nicholas Rispoli, he got in touch with me, and I did an interview with him about that process and trying to get it out. So they're still hoping to get it out at some point, but it hasn't happened yet. But that will technically be his last viewable film role.
Okay, well, I mean, since that is unreleased, I guess I should say that this is Heston's penultimate on-screen film, because he apparently played Joseph Malingal in some movie called Rua Algum 5555, My Father.
Wait, what?
Yeah, well, I have no idea what the hell that means, but yeah, he played Joseph Malingal in this movie from 2003, and I know nothing about it. It stars Thomas Kretschmann and F. Murray Abraham.
Oh, wait, okay, I was about to say maybe he didn't know he was in a movie, but if it has F. Murray Abraham, like, that dude's sharp. He knows what's going on. He chose to be in that movie for a reason.
Who the hell knows? You know, at that point, I mean, you know, you mentioned how maybe Charlton Heston did this to get a free trip to Jerusalem, but, you know, the dude is fucking Moses. I feel like he could just go there whenever he wanted to.
That's true, yeah, and I'm sure he didn't have money problems, but maybe he was a Van Damme fan, and he was like, yeah, I'll do a little cameo in a Van Damme movie. Wouldn't that be great if Charlton Heston was just, like, a really big Van Damme fan, and we just never knew it about it?
That would be like finding out that Terrence Malick loves The Jerk, you know? I mean...
I imagine him just, like, sitting in a darkened basement, just, like, pulling out his VHS copy and just giggling.
I like the way that Belgian guy kickboxes.
But no, yeah, he shows up. He has maybe like all of 2 or 3 scenes. He's kind of dressed like a shoddy Indiana Jones a little bit, like he's going to go on an archaeological adventure, because he is like the professor of archaeology at one of the universities there. But again, yeah, no action for him. There's a chase scene, there's a fight scene, he gets shot in the heart. The end.
Yeah, and it's sort of an odd writing decision, because we already have the bad guys kidnapping... Well, I don't know if kidnapping is the right word. We have the bad guys stealing Van Damme's father in this, and then they give him this sort of mentor character who's then killed off. It's like, did he need another reason to have a grudge with the villains in this film?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously personal vendetta, his father's friend, which, again, they barely have any back and forth, but Charlton Heston says, I've known him since he was a child. But yeah, no, it's weird. I was also very disappointed because reading the synopsis of this movie before I actually saw it, I assumed Charlton Heston was going to play Van Damme's father, and I was so excited to see how they were going to work that out.
Oh man, that would have been something. Yeah, so it's always funny when, like, somebody, like I said, Van Damme at this point in his career showing up in a low-budget direct-to-video movie makes perfect sense. But a genuine screen icon like Charlton Heston is surprising to see.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I think even before this, like, he was still getting decent work. Like, of course, he did, like, a cameo in the Planet of the Apes remake, the Tim Burton one and stuff.
Right, that was the same year as this, yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like, other than that, like, he had still been getting pretty decent roles in movies for the most part.
And honestly, at any time, you know, and he like, around the same time he did basically cameos in movies like In the Mouth of Madness and True Lies, and it's always funny when Charlton Heston shows up in a bit role, because then it becomes a Charlton Heston movie, you know? Like, up to that point, the film can be about anything, and as soon as he shows up, I mean, Wayne's World 2 is another great example. Suddenly, he's like a highlight of the film.
Oh yeah, no, as long as he can get that and credit, that's all that matters.
And this film does have a pretty solid supporting cast for this kind of thing. I do like Sophia Milos as Dahlia, who is kind of...
She is great, and she's actually like a kind of a badass character. Like,
yeah.
Of course, she has to be like the love interest for him, more or less, even though, you know, it goes to a point, but she works much better in like the sidekick capacity and actually like having agency and like doing shit and helping the plot move along and helping Van Damme out.
Yeah, it's cool. She does get a couple of action beats to herself, and like her and Van Damme, I don't remember them like ever kissing or anything like that. So she's only sort of an implied love interest.
Yeah, but they do wind up more or less together at the end, because I was super confused by this. And I guess at any point we can talk about this, but the freeze frame that this movie goes out on is amazing. But no, like, so at the end of the movie, everything's okay. He goes back to his dad's office and they're talking, and his dad has a map to where like the ancient like Mayan cities of gold are hidden. So Van Damme steals the map and runs out of his office, and then like there's this lady there, and he's like, "We're going to Mexico." It took me a second to realize that was her because she looks completely different.
Yeah, and that's sort of an odd moment to end the movie on because it kind of feels like, oh, and the adventure continues.
Like there was gonna be a sequel to this.
Well, who knows? I mean, looking at the Wikipedia article, apparently this movie did very well in Spain and Mexico.
It did good in DVD rentals because again, it was like a $12 million movie, which seems like a lot given this point in Van Damme's career. But I think I looked it up, and yeah, apparently it did like 18 million in rental sales.
Yeah, I mean, and you've referenced it over and over again on your show. I've mentioned it in my reviews that Van Damme's always been a bigger star internationally, and I do know that some of the films from this period played in theaters overseas. So
yeah, and this one you can look like there are many different countries where it did open up in theaters. It's just in the U.S. he was direct to video, so it's still like it did good because even his movies that did come direct to video did well on rental sales and stuff, but they still got released overseas because that's where he was a bigger star. That's where, because even his movies over here that flopped, if they were released overseas, they did pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, something like Maximum Risk kind of came and went without getting anybody's attention here, but it was a sizable hit in Europe and Asia, so it's interesting.
Because you had Ringo Lam directing, so of course.
Yeah. And another thing I want to mention, like the symbol of the order, obviously it's meant to look like the Templar Knight symbol, but it also ends up looking a lot like the Ku Klux Klan emblem.
It does. I read that in your review, so I was kind of looking for it, but yeah, it just stuck out like a sore thumb.
And, in the order, they wear, like, predominantly white robes, and I can't help but wonder, was that intentional? I mean, surely, because, like, they're bad guys, but it feels like there's no racial element in anything they're doing, so
there's
it's
not,
just
but
weird.
Maybe it's just saying, like, secretive kind of cult things like that are just bad across the board. They're comparative.
Perhaps. So, yeah, now I do want to mention, like I said, the car chases in this film aren't too hot, but that one on the airplane tarmac I do believe it involves like one of those little automated step vehicles, right?
Yeah, he actually runs into a plane and uses the wing of the plane to tear the stairs off of the vehicle he's driving, which I thought was a really good shot.
Yeah, it's a cool stunt, though. Like I said, I find the editing in some of those scenes to be a little jagged, not super great.
Well, it's kind of like that through a lot of it, mostly in the third act, because again, the third act, the tone shifts, it becomes much more serious and stuff. But again, like the transitions are still silly, haha, lighthearted fun time. Because again, it's like down here we're having a sword fight, or like we're about to explode this bomb and start a religious war, and then it's like wipe up, and then it's like people praying outside, and then it's side wipe and go back down to the bomb about to explode.
Yeah, no, it is just kind of odd. It's not like a super well put together film in that regard, and I don't know. It's hard to say if that was like something they had in the script, if that was a flaw in the writing, or if this is just something that happened through editing and producing and putting the movie together. Who's to say?
Yeah. Oh, I'm just looking at some of the lines that I will say, I mean, Van Damme is a pretty decent writer, at least coming up with stories and stuff, but there are some terrible lines in this. So there is the, like, police chief in this that is a bad police chief. He's working with the order because he wants to get the gold. And Van Damme is just trying to find his father and try to figure out who killed Charlton Heston and stuff like that. And they're just, like, talking about artifacts, like, oh, you're trying to smuggle stuff. And Van Damme is like, I know why you can smell bullshit. Because you're up to your nose in it.
Yes, and I mean, you say those one-liners are terrible, but they're kind of terrible in a great way.
A little bit. We do also get Charlton Heston saying "up yours" to some people after he runs them off the road because he's a terrible driver.
Right, again, brilliant. Like I said, it immediately becomes a Charlton Heston movie.
But even like his final one-liner to the bad guy, to Brian Thompson, is "You read the wrong book, pal."
Yeah. So, these things, it's trying to be kind of funny, but like setting the sort of lighthearted quasi-Indiana Jones riff in a really sort of heavily contested social, political, religious area like Jerusalem was an interesting choice.
It's weird, yeah, because they're doing kind of like slapsticky kind of comedy and lighthearted fun adventure Indiana Jones stuff. But again, like, oh no, you're actually talking about like the social issues going on like there and the religious issues going on, and like, oh, the whole thing is like we have to stop this bomb from blowing up in Jerusalem and basically starting World War III.
Yeah, if a nuclear bomb went off in the middle of Jerusalem, yeah, that would be bad. That would probably mean some pretty bad things for the entire world.
Yeah.
So it is odd that they wanted to make this kind of movie, but they chose that setting. So I have no idea what was going through their heads, but and I guess in the end it made the film more interesting because it does result in this sort of weird tonal shift that makes it good fodder for discussion.
I guess that is true, and it is, again, filming locations like that. Like, you go film a movie in Jerusalem, like, yeah, you're going to get that production value. It's going to have a little bit more gravitas than if, like, you just filmed it completely on sound stages, or it just, like, took place somewhere in America, and, like, oh, people had a bomb going off and Van Damme has to stop it, as opposed to, yeah, it's, again, the historical element, the whole, like, the religious cult, stuff like that. That's at least interesting ideas that you don't see in a lot of action movies like this. I will say there was also another movie called The Order from like 2003 with Heath Ledger that kept making me very confused because I kept trying to search for this movie and information about this movie, and that movie kept popping up.
Well, it's sort of funny because the same thing with Derailed. That was a low-budget Van Damme movie, and then a big-budget studio film with the same title was made a few years later. And actually, about that Heath Ledger movie, which I've never seen, but when it was coming out, I used to read this website called Greg's Upcoming Movie Previews, and he would always make note of mentioning, like, this order has no relation to the 2001 Jean-Claude Van Damme movie called The Order. And at the time, I'd never heard of this film. So it's like, why point that out? Like, well, why was that relevant anyway?
Yeah, I was about to say, he was pointing that out for no one.
I don't know. So, and, you make reference to the Jerusalem setting, and they certainly make sure that the gold dome, is in the background of most of the shots of those scenes. Like, they really wanted to get their money's worth out of that setting.
That's money shots right there.
Yeah. And it's even on the poster, so...
It definitely is, but I will say, like, obviously, when they're underground in the tunnels and stuff, that's sound stages and stuff like that. But they do have that first car chase scene that is really just, like, through the streets of Jerusalem and looks fucking incredible. Like, it is a great... And it does end in a very cool way to where he rams into them and they flip over into a fountain, and then there's a slow-motion fountain fight.
Yes. Very important. And I can't imagine Jerusalem is a cheap place to shoot,
That's the thing, too. I wonder if that's why the budget was kind of bigger, or if because they had that budget, they were able to go shoot there and stuff. Because otherwise, you figured there'd be a couple of, like, tracking shots or, like, establishing shots of Jerusalem, and then everything else is, like, filmed cheaply somewhere else. But for the most part, it looks like they really filmed there.
Yeah, although, like I said, I imagine most of the other scenes are probably shot somewhere like Bulgaria or South Africa, where most of this production companies release their films. And honestly, like I said, the new image, low-budget action movie, none of these films are good, and yet, for some reason, I feel kind of interested in them. Like the low-budget, turn-of-the-century, shot in Bulgaria action movie. It's just...
Are they kind of like the next-gen canon films?
I mean, I think New Image / Millennium Films is the bridge between canon and the Asylum. That's where I would put them.
But again, like, Van Damme getting a start with canon, like, was that just the natural progression after Hollywood, kind of chewed him up and spit him out? Like, he went back to a canon-like company to kind of foster him during that time?
Well, and I think the environment had really, really changed. Like, late 90s, early 2000s was sort of a weird time to be into movies because the video store, in some regards, would be dying off very, very soon.
Oh, yeah, it was starting.
Yeah, but it was also, at a weird time, kind of an odd boom around the same time where, like, DVDs suddenly became very cheap to produce, and you saw a lot of films being made strictly for the straight-to-video market, or straight-to-DVD market. And this, most of the stuff Van Damme was doing at the time was going in that direction.
Well, yeah, because most of that stuff would still be stocked on your Blockbuster shelves and stuff. So it got to the point where video stores maybe weren't quite as big. Like, you basically just had your three companies that did it. You had your Blockbuster, Movie Gallery, and Hollywood Video. But yeah, within a few years, Movie Gallery, Hollywood Video would kind of shut down, and then Blockbuster would just hang on for dear life as long as it could.
And maybe it wasn't so much the video stores as places like Walmart and Best Buy, the big box stores, where people could go in and buy, a DVD for $10 or $5.
For about the same price as a rental for 2 or 3 nights.
Right, and, it's sort of different when VHS was a new technology and booming. They were very expensive. I mean, VHS tapes were about $100 when they were brand new, but DVD was the opposite. It went even very early in the technology's lifespan. It was relatively cheap. So maybe that's why there was this kind of boom for direct-to-video films. I keep saying direct-to-video, but I mean direct-to-DVD around that time. Though I'm pretty sure this must have come out on VHS as well.
Oh, yeah. Well, because I think that VHS kind of still produced things until, 2006. Because I think History of Violence was, the last new movie produced on VHS. Without, certain exceptions where, if they do a special production for nostalgic reasons or something, or the type of movie it is.
Yeah, we've gotten to the point where now the hipster VHS release is a thing that exists.
Hey, I'm all about it, actually. I have several that are more recently produced VHSs.
It's true, and I do think, I know The Void was released on VHS, and that's like a low-budget horror movie that would prosper from being watched on home video. But I know that A History of Violence was the last VHS, big studio VHS release, but what I always associate with that era, the last VHS I bought, I should say when it was brand new, was Highlander Endgame, and that's kind of like, all right.
Ooh, yeah. That was a rental for me, but I rented that on VHS.
Well, I love the Highlander series, so
well,
that's another podcast.
They were crossing the movies and the TV show. I was all about that at the time.
I
grew
even
up on the TV show as well.
Yeah, I watched it. I even liked the cartoon. I don't know if you remember Highlander, the animated series.
I do vaguely, but I was not a fan of it. Actually, there was at least 1 or 2 more Highlander movies after Endgame, because I know there was one called The Source or something.
Oh,
like
yeah,
that.
The Source was that's derailed levels of bad, my friend.
Oh man, I kind of still want to watch it though, because I can't get enough of them Highlanders.
It features a new middle cover of the Queen song, "Princess of the Universe."
Oh God, I have to watch that. By the way, weird connection. I know it sounds like we're getting derailed talking about Highlander, but hey, have you seen the new teaser trailer for the Kickboxer sequel? Guess who's in that?
I haven't.
Christopher
Lambert, yeah. Oh man, well, I mean, I hope Van Damme and Christopher Lambert have a scene together.
I hope they fight. That would be great.
I mean, at this point in Van Damme still totally has the action movie chops, but I don't know if Lambert does. So I'm not hoping for a fight, but I would at least hope they trade dialogue, they have some snide remark to one another.
Oh yeah, no, I'm expecting, Van Damme to come back as kind of the Sensei Master Duran character, and then Christopher Lambert to maybe be the main bad guy that's sending the big hulking guy that the Kickboxer has to fight after them. So maybe there might be some interplay there. I'm really hoping for that.
Yeah, and I got to tell you that not to totally get off topic here, but that Kickboxer Vengeance was way better than it had any right to be.
Way better than it had any right to be. I was so excited about that. I actually saw that in theaters. I drove 45, 50 minutes away from where I was living at the time just to go see that in a theater.
Well, that's because you are a Jean-Claude Van Damme superfan, my friend.
I was super excited. It was way better than it had any right to be. And again, I thought Dave Bautista was the perfect Tong Po for this kind of movie, an updated version of Kickboxer.
Yeah, and he was great, and I was happy, when they announced that Van Damme would be playing the sensei role in the Kickboxer remake. I assumed that it would be kind of a small role, but he's the main, he's second build, he's practically the star of the film, and he gets a lot of stuff to do, and I really liked that.
Oh yeah, he definitely kind of passes the torch down a little bit, but yeah, he still has a lot to do as well. I think the only thing kind of missing from his character is that he should have been a little bit of a drunk.
Well, yeah, they didn't. They got a dance in there, but not the drinking. You're right. Well, anyway, the order. He doesn't get drunk in this one.
He doesn't. He does dance, so that counts as something, which is kind of surprising. I expected to at least see him take a shot or have a drink when he was in that strip club at least. But yeah, no drinking.
Well, I mean, I got to tell you, on my Van Damme checklist, this is a 5 out of 5. You know, we've got a shirtless fight, we've got a close-up screaming, we've got dancing, jump kicking a guy through something, and a split or a roundhouse kick, both in this. So,
yeah. Well, that's the thing, and this hasn't happened in a while in doing this show to where it actually hit every single one of the tropes, but this did this as well, and I think I have about 5 that I go on as well. I just combine them down. But yeah, Personal Vendetta, yeah, said stole his dad. Nudity and shirtlessness, yep, that shirt gets ripped off. Slow-mo screaming, kicking people through things, hell yeah. Nationality, not addressed, which still counts because it's a thing. Splits and spin kicks, midair split, which was amazing, a good bit of spin kicks and stuff like that, and he dances. Like, this hits everything, but it's still just not that great of a movie, which brings us to final Van Damage rating. Of course, I always say on a scale of Derailed to Bloodsport, 1 to 10, but I don't know if you listened to the episode, I gave Derailed a 2, because, again, there's still a few I haven't seen. Maybe there's something worse than Derailed. This certainly isn't worse than Derailed, but yeah, so still say Derailed to Bloodsport, because that's, at the time, the worst I've seen.
I mean, I think that's fair. You know, there's still about, well, actually, after I've finished with this, you know, marathon, will only be 2 of his leading roles I haven't seen, which is, I think, Second in Command, it's called, and The Hardcore, and I haven't seen either of those. Have you seen those?
Yes, actually. The Hardcore is another Sheldon Lettich movie.
Oh, is that one good?
It's alright.
Okay.
It's not great. It's definitely better than Second in Command. Second in Command is... It's a weird one. It is much more of like a kind of war movie, and Van Damme isn't too great in it. It's kind of all over the place and doesn't really feel like a Van Damme movie. The Hardcore is definitely better, but it's also weird, and like Vivica A. Fox is in it and stuff.
Well, you know, I mean, something I've been thinking about as I've been updating my blog these last couple of nights is, you know, I don't know if I have enough material for a third JCVD-a-thon, you know, JCVD-a-thon Regeneration, I guess I'd call it, since this is the return. You know, but I realized if I throw in the Kickboxer and Bloodsport sequels, I'd probably have enough material. So that, no guarantees that may happen.
Well, yeah, just talk about movies that don't have JCVD. Oh, well, I guess you can talk about the new Kickboxer movies.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be out, and Blackwater and will be out, and maybe Full Love will be out by then, though I've kind of given up on that movie ever coming out.
Yeah, I mean, but they did release a trailer a little while back. I mean, who knows? I've been wanting to see that for a while as well. But you could also search for more weird, obscure ones, because, like, I still haven't watched his Kung Fu Panda 2 and 3 playing a character in that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could include stuff like that. And I know there are titles like things like Swelter and Dragon Eyes where he's like 4th or 5th build, where he, you know, presumably has like a handful of scenes. I don't know how big his parts are in those movies.
I think Dragon Eyes, he is like the 2nd build. I think there's like a younger lead, and then he's the other guy, maybe the bad guy. I don't know. Swelter, I think he is like 4th or 5th build. Both of those are on Netflix, actually. There's one I've really been wanting to see. I don't know much about it, but I saw it on his IMDb. I think it's called, like, Jai Bing Man or something.
Yeah.
And it's like an Asian film that he was in as himself.
Right, yeah, I've read of this, and I can't help but assume this is a cameo, but I don't know. I know nothing about the film.
But he's, like, at least, I don't know if it's an actual poster. I think it's a poster, but he's, like, on the poster with the lead guy, I guess. So I assume he's maybe just, like... I'd hope he's in a good bit of the movie. Like, maybe he's a weird sidekick or something.
Well, I'm looking at his IMDb filmography right now, and by Jiang Bing Man, it says cameo.
Ah, damn it.
So this is probably one of those scenarios where he's in, like, 1 or 2 scenes, but they put his face on the poster to help sell the movie.
Well, I mean, it works. It makes me want to see it. I can't fault him for that.
And there's another one called Narco, where he plays a ghost.
What? Is that a newer one, or has that been out already?
This is from 2004. It's called Narco, and his part is Jean's ghost. Oh. And it says minor role. It's a French film. It's about a narcoleptic whose life is made difficult by his inability to keep a job.
Weird. Yeah, no, I totally want to say, because that's another reason I haven't watched, like, I think it's called Alien Uprising, but it's one that, like, I think his daughter is in or something, and he has a little cameo in it, but, like, I don't really want to watch that, but I guess I have to at some point.
Yeah, Alien Uprising, UFO is the alternate title for that. Yeah, that's another one where he has, like, a spit part, and I don't know if I can include those and then call it, like, a real Van Damme marathon. I mean, like, is it really fair when he's in maybe 10 seconds of the movie.
Or you could do a Van Damme marathon where it is just cameo roles, and you just watch all the movies he did cameos in. You can watch Last Action Hero for no reason.
Yeah, he's in, are you going to cover Last Action Hero for this podcast?
Yeah,
even though he's in the movie for 5 seconds?
Oddly enough, of course, my partner Cole from Crushed Celluloid, I've wanted him to be on the show since I started it, and he hasn't done it yet, but the only movie he said he would do was Last Action Hero, so I think he's going to do that one with me.
All right, well, I look forward to hearing it. So anyway, how I would rate this movie on the Van Damme scale, I would probably put it about a 6.
Ooh, that's way higher than I was going.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's not terrible, but again, I just did it in Hell recently, and I think I gave that one like a 7. And like, this is way worse than in Hell. I think I would give this like a 4, 4.5.
No, I mean, I think I gave it a 6 mostly for the scene where he's dressed as a rabbi. If I'm being totally honest, I think that elevated the entire film for me.
Well, that's the thing. I'm giving it like a 4 as far as like the quality of the movie, and even the quality of like a Van Damme. Like, I guess it is a pretty good Van Damme movie. It kind of hits everything, all the tropes, everything that makes a Van Damme movie. It's just not a very good movie. It's totally watchable, and I would totally recommend it to anyone because you need to see it to believe it if you're a fan of Van Damme. But if you're not, it doesn't really hold its own as a movie.
Well, and I feel like as far as a Jean-Claude Van Damme movie in 2001, this is probably pretty good, I mean, when you put it side by side something like Derailed, it looks great.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's true, and Derailed came out a little bit later, but again, like, wait another year, you get Replicant. You don't have to settle for this, man. You can do better.
Well, I mean, okay, I guess that's fair. I don't know, I think I did like this one maybe a little more than you. Like, it's not a particularly memorable film. It's not super fantastic, but there are some fun scenes in it that I do enjoy. And I feel if you're a Van Damme fan, this is a good one to watch because it hits most of his troops. In fact, another one that's sort of a Van Damme troop is him playing a double, and he's playing what is presumably his ancestor in this film. So he is. We do get two Van Dammes in this sort of
double. Yeah, so that I guess that kind of counts too. And again, yeah, it's not terrible or anything. It does have really competent and pretty well done action scenes, but it's also just the fact that it is a Sheldon Lettich movie, and when you compare this to the other Van Damme Lettich movies like Lionheart, like Double Impact, it's not up to snuff. It's just not.
Well, I guess we'll just have to part ways on this one. I mean, I'm not rating it that much higher than you. I agree, it's a pretty mediocre movie.
Well, that's
but
true.
I had
mean,
fun with
the
it.
median of our answers is a 5, which I mean, I guess is a bit more fair. That's why I maybe said 4.5. It's probably a decent 5. It's a middling film. It's watchable. It isn't great. It has its slumps and stuff, but it has good action. It has good Van Damme performance in it, more or less. I'll maybe bump it up to a 5. I'll be generous.
I would put it above stuff like Wake of Death. That movie was kind of the mediocre, medium Van Damme experience, and this is more memorable than that.
But again, I would totally watch Until Death again way before this again.
Yeah, well, that's a more interesting film as far as the dramatic beats go. But overall, I'm glad I watched it just for the scene of him kicking ass in the curls and the hat because I'm so glad I have that in my life now.
Exactly, and I feel like this is the thing that I've done this podcast for a while now. It's been a lot of movies that I've loved and have seen before, a few that I'm not crazy about, or some that I've seen for the first time. I feel like it's been a little while since I've seen silly, fun Van Damme, because the last one I did was In Hell. The one before that was fucking Derailed. I was happy to see Van Damme looking like he's having a decent time and kind of into what he's doing.
Yeah, and you can always tell when he's invested in the material. There are definitely, I always say, post-cocaine, you can tell which movies have his attention and which ones where he's just kind of in for the paycheck. He needs to pay the bills, yeah.
Yeah.
And something like Six Bullets or Wake of Death, you can see that he is just sort of bored with the material. But a movie like this or Inferno, he's a little more engaged.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I said, and I really don't want to put down his direct-to-video years at all, because I do feel like it made him become a better actor, and he did way more interesting and weird and different stuff than he would have done if he had stayed more Hollywood famous, if he had kept doing more big-budget or A-list pictures. So I'm appreciative of this, and I'm appreciative of even movies like this that aren't fantastic, but again, it's different, and it's not just, you know, him making Time Cop over and over again or something, or him making another Die Hard ripoff.
Yeah, and, you know, and there are some gems during these years. I mean, we've mentioned a lot of them. Another one I'll mention here is The Shepherd, which is actually a really cool kick-ass action flick.
Shepherd Border Patrol. Fuck yeah. That is a really good movie.
Yeah, I mean, like,
well,
that,
I mean,
it's
not great, but it's really enjoyable. I actually quite like that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, there are films like, you know, In Hell and Until Death and Legionnaire where he's actually trying to act and he's doing something more dramatically different. And then there's something like The Shepherd, which is just a balls-to-the-wall action film and very satisfying in that regard.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, that's kind of where he's the best. And I think that's why he didn't work that well in Hollywood. He couldn't do a lot of more mainstream stuff. He kind of has to do balls-to-the-wall action or just fucking weird out there kind of things to really click with material, I think.
And that's why we love Van Damme. And that's why we're all doing this show right now. So.
Absolutely. So, Zach Clopton, sir, plug everything you got. I'm interested. You kind of mentioned that you're doing another podcast that I don't think I've listened to yet.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, my current, I'm doing a podcast. You know, I've been doing the Bangers and Mash show for 6 years. Something that, for a while, I was kind of hoping to maybe start a new show next year, but now I'm probably going to be going back to school next year, so I'm probably not going to have the time to do that. So I hate to deflate your balloon there, but
Oh, well, I thought you said you were part of a show with some friends of yours that wasn't Bangers and Mash.
Right, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm on the So Weird podcast, which is devoted to a very obscure Disney Channel show called So Weird that aired in 2001.
Oh, is that what that show is? I'm totally going to listen. I love So Weird.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, no, I am a big fan of that. I didn't realize that's what that podcast was. I'm totally going to search that out. Is that on iTunes and stuff, or is there a website?
Yeah, it's on iTunes, it's on YouTube. I do that with three girls, Kathy, Emily, and Kat.
Is it called So Weird?
It's called the So Weird Podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited for that. I really enjoyed that show.
What are the odds? We should have you on.
Oh, yeah, I would totally be down to do that. Also, of course, plug website, zachsfilmthoughts.blogspot.com.
Yeah, telling me to plug my own blog there. Thanks, Marcus.
Yeah, I'm just saying, it's good stuff. I've really been enjoying the second JCVD-a-thon you've been doing. I've enjoyed that. I especially enjoyed finishing this movie today and then reading your 2 cents on it before we did this podcast. But you did mention Bangers and Mash, and I do want to plug one of the most, or maybe the most recent episode you did.
Yeah, it's the most recent one,
with Brandon Leday, who did Double Team on this show, but you guys talked about RoboCop, and I thought that was really entertaining.
Yeah, you actually caught the live stream of that, which was an accident. I actually meant to make that private. But, yeah, our most recent Bangers and Mash episode is not with my usual co-host, Mr. Mash. It's with Brandon Leday from Swamp Flicks. And we talk about the RoboCop multimedia franchise, which is fascinating in its misguidedness. And I've got 2 episodes in the coffer right now. We're going to be talking, JD and I are talking mummy movies, and I'm talking the Gamera series with Guy Volan, another dissolver. So,
ooh, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever spoken to him outside of the internet, but that's awesome, and I love the Gamera movies, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, that's that. Those will be definitely out before the end of the month, and maybe JD and I will be doing a Planet of the Apes episode probably before the end of the month too. So watch out for that, Bangers and Mash fans, if you exist. and then, yeah, there's my blog, zachsfilmthoughts.blogspot.com. Like I said, I'm in the middle of JCVD-a-thon 2. After we get done recording, I'm going to upload my review of In Hell, probably. And you know, and I'm usually, my blog is usually updated daily, almost daily. You can usually find me there.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for appearing once again for the 3rd time on this show. You know, everyone else that I invite on is a guest. You're pretty much like a guest co-host at this point.
Well, as I said at the beginning of the show, I think once you get down to, like, you know, Mononco Forever and shit like that, it'll probably just be me or Sean rotating in and out.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, unless I can guilt other people into doing it. Be like, I was on your show, you owe me.
Like today on the JPVD, we're talking about episode 6 of Jean-Claude Van Damme Behind Closed Doors. This is my co-host Zach, once again.
Honestly, I was going to do a crossover thing with the guys that do the other Jean-Claude Van Damme cast, and that's kind of what I thought I would do with them. I was like, no one else would do this with me. I'm going to make you guys talk about Behind Closed Doors with me.
But I mean, it blows my mind that there's more than one Van Damme podcast. Wow.
There is actually like 3. But I will I will put in that I am probably the best.
Yeah, you have to fight them. You have to make them tap out and yell Kumite.
I will do my best. But yeah, thank you very much, Zach. Of course, you can find the show. You're listening to it, so you found it or whatever. We're on Twitter at pod_Damme, facebook.com/crushcelluloid, the website crushcelluloid, all that kind of nonsense and garbage. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you here next time on Jean-Claude Van Damme.